George Alexeyev at OEHA. So I really want to thank the panel for their insightful comments and the constructive suggestions on how we can move further on the virus screen tool that we're developing here. But actually, I wanted to step back a little bit to where Bonnie was, SB 25. So that was a very interesting law in terms of requiring both the Air Board and OEHA to relook at both its ambient air quality standards as well as the toxic standards. And in the ambient air quality standards, so we did a review and we updated the particulate matter standard for 2.5 at that time. That was about 10 years ago. We updated it to 12 micrograms per cubic meter. So day before on Tuesday, US EPA adopted a final rule of 12 micrograms per cubic meter. So it only took them 10 years to catch up to California. So it's exactly what you're saying in terms of pushing the science and having them catch up to us. So in one way, some ways we do very well. This is a situation where OEHA recommends a standard, works with Air Board, and Air Board adopts the standard, and it's a good team, and that works. But looking at SB 25, I just wanted to mention something because there's something that we haven't done very well, which I think pertains to this. There's several things we have to look at in terms of children. And one of the requirements is to basically to assess the interaction of multiple pollutants on infants and children, and also to look at special susceptibilities. So that's something we really haven't done. And one of the things that's always struck me, since we do review ambient air quality standards, and I really enjoy reading these documents because I really like the way that, both scientists from OEHA and Air Board write. Anyway, and there's this structural issue which Amy touched upon. For PM 2.5, great, we did it for children's health, but actually it was based upon mortality. It wasn't based upon children's health. We did it, with other sensitive populations. So, and when I've reviewed all of these ambient air quality standards, many of them are based upon human clinical studies in the laboratory, some at Davis, great studies, like ozone. But then you look at the epi literature and you see that at that concentration that we're recommending for a standard, there's still an increased exacerbation of asthma reports or asthma hospitalizations or asthma cases or things like that. They're still there. And so I talked to the staff about that. Well, what's the story? We're saying this standard is going to be okay based upon the experimental study. And their answer is, well, that's because there's a lot of other stuff out there and it's interacting. And we don't really know if it's NO2 or we don't know if it's ozone. So I think that's really what, in my mind, we haven't gotten at. There is literature showing that at the levels we're saying are okay, there's actually effects. So I think that's something that maybe we can think about how we can better use that information to address ourselves. And that's my thought. The other thought I thought was in response to the risk assessment, and this is a totally separate issue, is we as risk assessors need to do better in talking about what the risk assessment is not showing or not doing or not incorporating. Our other colleagues in academia and in business have been really good at identifying uncertainties that basically suggest that our risk assessments are overestimating the risk. We have not been good at looking at these other issues, which suggest, maybe there's other things that are interacting that is underestimating the risk. So, thank you.
The one thing that I would say is how important it is for OEHA and others to continue to shine a very bright light on the problems and how they relate to the standards. Because, at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, we're at the level, the standards are already at a level to where we have to do absolutely everything we can and more in order to reduce air pollution to get anywhere close to the standards. But those debates go on, and we lose context of the fact that there are real health consequences to decisions being made trying to get us there. And George pointing out how this relates to, whether we've gone far enough in setting those standards. I think, bringing that information, that science, and those public health consequences to light is just vitally important, and I couldn't thank or support you more in that.
Wes Smith from OEHA again. I'm relatively new to OEHA. I started back here in September, coming from the University of Washington, where Elaine actually taught me risk assessment. And we sort of had a little crucible of graduate students and staff and faculty who would work together. And we sort of had this motto of putting the public back in public health, because I was trained as a bench toxicologist and switched over from, or wanted to get more experience in the public health side of things. So just two things that keep popping to mind are the inclusion of social scientists and psychologists in these discussions, because they have ideas of how to have better metrics for some of the SES indicators, and to listen to them and rather than recreate the wheel, use what they've done. And then the other area is one area that's evolved from medical science, actually, in sort of public databases and using social networks to have the public actually have direct buy-in to what, for biobanking, for instance, so they can decide with an online registry what they want their samples used for.
I think the suggestions you raise are really good ones, some of which people are also working on here. We did a project, sort of a first step towards doing what Cal Enviro Screen is doing now, doing our EJ screening method, which was a similar approach, taking multiple metrics to characterize and identify communities of concern. We were looking at these issues comparatively within regions at census tracts, and we did a lot of community engagement, one in the development of what people thought were relevant social and health vulnerability measures, and then sort of trying to reconcile that with a reality check about what data was available to develop the metrics that people cared about. So, for example, metrics emerged from community engagement about, communities were concerned about, they want a measure of how able is a community to engage politically and exert political power. So then we thought, how could we measure that? So we came up with voter turnout, linguistic isolation, which is beautiful to see it in the Enviro screen. But then the other thing that we did is, after we screened and developed our maps, was to do what we call ground truthing with community members themselves to show also where regulatory databases might fall short in terms of identifying both sensitive receptors as well as other emission sources of concern that might be falling below the regulatory radar screen. So it provides a nice way, kind of in the way Gina's suggesting, is to be able to combine sort of local measurements as well as local knowledge to enhance some of these broad-based screening strategies that are based on regulatory agency databases.
Hi. Yes, we all believe coming to Mecca here is actually coming to Cal EPA because of the tremendous and creative insights that have come from this agency. So I had 3 points. The first one was that this idea of broadening the table and making sure, even from the idea of disciplines at the table, seems to be a constant comment at the US EPA. I mean, over and over again, who's at the table? How are we doing this? And we realized that that table really needs to be large, even from the disciplinary standpoint, let alone before we even tackle the and think about the importance of the community there and how we make that possible for their voices to be heard. The second point gets at this idea of vulnerability, and I'm old enough now that I keep being reminded by my engineering friends, they have always wondered why the public health scientists have done risk assessments without vulnerability factors in there. It's a normal part of how they look at critical infrastructure, resilience, and things. And so they've always wondered why we've changed the formula for risk equals hazard times exposure. And I keep saying, well, it's kind of in the exposure component of that. But so I think we need to remember what was on the table, and we somehow, just because we couldn't answer those questions very well, kind of shifted it over into default factors rather than realizing it's an inherent part of how we do risk assessment. And then the last point is going back to this issue about the challenges in risk assessment. And I just want to reiterate something that I always tell my colleagues, that as a toxicologist in a school of public health, I feel I have failed if I have a positive human epidemiological study. And so this idea of decisions in the face of uncertainty are extraordinarily important, and we forget about this. So when we're asked about this moral responsibility, I could not agree more, and I could not agree more with the comments that have already been made. But I wanted to emphasize this because I worry a bit that we shift back and forth about, I think there are real challenges in using the very basic screening approaches in the computational toxicology and Tox 21. But I also think there are moral responsibilities that we wait till we have gigantic bodies of literature that show we're having deaths. This is not just small, early biological response. We have deaths with air pollution. And I think we need to think about there's happy medium in there somewhere that has not only early biological response, but even signals that are coming from other predictive systems. And I don't want us to forget that, that the animal testing, the signals have been out there, but they've been ignored in many of these cases because, well, but we're not seeing it in the human populations. Well, maybe we haven't looked, and we haven't looked closely enough, but I would argue that we need to have it occur before we have to look and be able to count the body approach in this. So I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, risk assessment, we're very good at predicting. The question is that a lot of people don't believe those predictions from reductionist data, whether it's structure activity, whether it's early gene responses. And so realize that there's a lot of information out there. We just choose because it's harder to explain that data and the signal in the public. Thanks.
Yeah. Farla Kaufman, OEHA. I want to thank the organizers and the panelists. It's been amazing to listen to all this. I was thinking earlier about what Shankar said in terms, and it sort of ties into everything. You know, what do? We can't bring the technology to bear to lower exposures, and yet we have the science here. You know, Elaine just talked about uncertainty, but in some cases we really have the bodies. We know the science. What do? We have impacted communities. How do we morally address that? So I think, you know, to move from just risk assessment to promoting our research or the findings to policymakers to push research that has an impact. For instance, we don't know how to address roadway exposures. Well, there's some research going on, especially Tom Cahill at UC Davis, that shows perhaps vegetation can mitigate exposure, certain vegetation. Redwood, he's doing great research, you know. Is it just that we can make a difference now with something like planting trees, the right trees? We have to, I think, at this point, look ahead and promote research that makes an impact because, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, and yes, we're risk assessors, and we have to be careful what we say in some cases, but really, I think we could do a better job at that. Thank you.
Mark Miller, OEHA, kind of reiterating how Amy started this off about, well, it's about the kids. So where did children's environmental health come from early? And I think, you know, one of the motivating forces was this research done from the education, child development realm, and economic impacts. And they use this economics world term of opportunity cost of funds. And so it's where is your money best spent? And it very clearly is a steep downward trend over childhood, early childhood to late childhood. And, you know, someplace in later childhood, your money would be better spent on early childhood intervention. So I think that we should be thinking about it, and it's another plea for the cross-pollination between economics and you know, these other fields like education and child development and all that sort of thing. Just
Christoph Oika. I would like to make a remark or just an idea about the combined action of chemical and physical factors, because like the last lecture presentation was excellent example about the near road pollution and asthma, and also included the stress. But when one thinks about stress related to near road like pollution, this is mostly the noise, like from So how would we measure the noise? Like, if we can measure like the stress with chemical factors, we can measure the noise, and also we can relate it like to the asthma. If asthma is the most important endpoint in this case, then even a new standard for the noise can be created, like noise level at roads, which can be achieved by different kind of, let's say, different kind of road design, like road cover, sound barriers, or like no matter how much the car is as part of the equation is improved, whether there will be like zero pollution. If there is still noise, there still will be like impact on the nearby population. So this also can be included in the, if such kind of relationship can be established, it can be included in the EnviroScreen program, and this way included in the prioritization of different communities. So that's everything.
Just to comment on the pollution and the noise and the stress, I think scientifically it's a really important question, but I'm also a huge fan of measures like distance-weighted traffic metrics that have very clear policy levers. I mean, combining those two measures, I think, are at some point it doesn't matter as much from a policy point of view whether it's the noise or the stress. It's about traffic, and so if you can reduce traffic and people's exposure to it, the actual sort of black box and how much is noise versus pollution and which pollutants are contributing is an important scientific question, but from a policy point of view, maybe not quite as important. And so the relevant metric from a policy point of view may just be the actual measures or traffic counts, traffic density, distance weighted, that kind of thing.
Okay, now I'm going to give the floor back to Gina Solomon to go back to this question of Tox 21 and the transition in chemical testing and how to think about that as part of this or in whatever way you want to bring up.
Okay, thanks, Amy. The things that Deborah Corey-Schlechter was talking about yesterday sort of, have an obvious link to the Tox 21 data, because starting from the disease perspective, and there are groups that are doing this around cardiovascular disease and breast cancer, which are not really as directly child-related. Starting from the disease perspective and looking back at what biological pathways lead to that disease, and then can go a step further back and look at, okay, which of the assays in the current Tox 21, set of assays will actually collect any relevant information for those pathways, and then which of those pathways are not currently assessed in the current Tox 21 assays, and that opens obvious opportunities for both improving Tox 21 and also starting to form intelligent groupings of chemicals to look at together, because we would actually start to end up with almost a, for each disease or endpoint, almost like a sort of a heat map of what kinds of patterns you might look for within all of these pathway-based assays that would, we would think be predictive of those endpoints. And so if we start seeing, and then we could start pulling out chemicals that show that pattern and looking at them more closely with regards to those particular diseases or endpoints. So, that was really my main thought there, but I also think that risk assess. There's so many chemicals now that are being or will very shortly have been tested in Tox 21. They're doing 10,000 chemicals. Every pesticide, I think, already has data, and so when risk assessors at Cal EPA are looking at chemicals, one of the things that should be a routine part of that assessment, I would think, would be, okay, what did Tox 21 data show? And do those results make any sense given what we see in the animal data in our assessment so far? Does it jive? Can we identify things that don't jive? If so, then we should be informing the various federal agencies that are running the Tox 21 program of those discrepancies and pushing for improvements. And if they do jive and, offer us additional insights, then that is going to be ultimately a real benefit. But I think there is a big learning curve too, and so having our risk assessments start to include a section that looks at those data will be important also for just educating ourselves. Let's look at all of these, and when I look at them, I kind of go, oh my gosh, I don't know what a lot of these markers are, what some of these pathways are, and so it will help us get up to speed so that we can be appropriately critical and help improve the whole process at the federal level, which is, I think, going to be incredibly important because at a certain point in the future, there's going to be diminishing animal data and dramatically increasing pathway-based data, and we're going to have to be ready for that, and we should start preparing now.
Can I just ask you to say a couple sentences about what Tox 21 is for anyone who may not be aware?
Tox 21 is a collaborative program between US EPA, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and the FDA to develop very rapid robotic in vitro, largely in vitro assays, though there are some zebrafish assays as part of it. These are cell-based assays, most but not all in human cells, some in rodent cells, that are designed to look for perturbations of biological pathways that are thought to be related to disease. So some of them are super obvious, receptor binding, transcriptional activation assays for various hormones. Others look at markers of oxidative stress. Others are looking at sort of somewhat more complex integrated pathways. But there are big advantages to these approaches because they are fast, can look at a lot of chemicals, will ultimately be a lot cheaper, and can give us some important so-called upstream information. But there are also huge limitations that we could easily think about and enumerate about not having whole animal systems, questions about whether you're getting at metabolites and questions about whether you're actually getting at vulnerable populations, which they're trying to do through various different types of cell lines and other enzymatic systems and other things that they're trying to sort of add in. But we need to think about all of that a lot more to give them advice on it.
Okay, so I'm going to now turn to the panel for their final comments.
The only thing I want to add is another big challenge that I think we want to think about, and that actually people are thinking about, is how do we amass all of the human and animal and other kinds of data to pull it together in kind of a systemic review process so that it's relevant to decision makers. And we didn't get to talk much about that, but Dr. Woodruff did reference that in her talk in terms of strategies for how we navigate the science. They're working on it. Others at EPA are working on it. And I think that's something that we can engage in that process in terms of thinking about how we navigate the science and think about informing decision makers about what the data that we do have means for children's health.
I would just encourage the scientists who are working on this issue of cumulative impacts and children's health, which in my view is the one thing that really lays bare the the tender spot and the weaknesses of our current approach to protecting the environment and public health. To the researchers, please continue your work and make that effort to bring it to the decision makers and to the public. You need to, I would encourage all of you to spend a concerted amount of time figuring out not only how you're going to do your next research project, but how you're going to convey those results to the public, and what program and what opportunities you're going to have to make sure that the public and decision makers understand your results. Because I think when we look at the trend of research over time, it becomes obvious that the more we know, the worse things are. And we continually strengthen our standards because we continually find that we have underestimated the impacts. And this is based off evolving and science and better science. And the need to convey those new results and to be 10 years out ahead of the curve like we are, we have to narrow that gap between what happens here in California and what happens in the federal government, but also what the researchers are finding out here now. Ultrafine particles are a great example. And then the policy response by those who make decisions about policy. And I think, if we look at the work at USC and Rob McConnell on the Children's Health Study as an example of a really good effort of making sure that the masses understood what they found and how important it was, I think it's a good example for others to look to for conveying your research results and how they fit into these bigger picture policy issues.
Do I still get more time? Then I guess my last thought is on defaults, because they've been mentioned a number of times during the meeting, and it's such an important issue. And I've heard actually a bunch of good ideas, including Elaine's point that they really should be, vulnerability really should be part of the equation as it is in the EnviroScreen, and not sort of defaults that are tacked on afterward. That's a really interesting thought to mull over as we move forward. But I think that if we do end up being stuck with defaults for a while, which is reasonably likely, there are so many efforts that have occurred, and I think we could bring together and move forward with on really getting a better handle on those. And I know that there's an existing project with OEHA and US EPA, and there have been other researchers who have actually kind of started to look at what do the data show in terms of some of these vulnerabilities, and what can we really point to in the literature that would help us understand whether we're really adequately accounting for all of the different social vulnerabilities, biological vulnerabilities, genetic vulnerabilities, et cetera, that we need to be. And so I think that's a project that we should continue to nudge along in the next, in the coming years.
So thanks. My comments would be about 4 different areas that we need to move forward on. First of all, continuing to promote research, as someone said, that makes an impact. And I think that research that clarifies really the crisis that we're facing from air pollution across the state is critical. And while we have some very good data on premature deaths, and we use that data and it's very helpful, it sometimes seems that the research on asthma, especially the link between air pollution and causing new cases of asthma, and the research on children's health and how these pollutants are particularly affecting children, and all this research about premature births and infant impacts, all of this research sometimes seems to make a bigger impact in talking with policymakers. But all of this is important, again, to clarify in the policymaker's mind that this problem is something that they need to take urgent action on. So promoting research that makes a difference and getting it into the policy arena. And I would agree the Children's Health Study and the near freeway traffic impacts research is a body that has definitely made a big difference. Secondly, continue moving forward with policies to reduce pollution and create healthier communities. This is critical. We need to do this while we're continuing to improve the research. We can't wait. We have to take advantage of the opportunities under SB 375, opportunities to reduce diesel pollution, opportunities to remake our freight infrastructure and freight system in California to help reduce community impacts. And getting zero-emission vehicles, zero-emission equipment out there now is very critical. So that's a second key area. Third, bringing health experts and health researchers into the policy process, both at the state and the local level, is very important. And as I mentioned, at the SCAG process in Southern California was a key factor. And then finally, using and finding opportunities to use available funds to mitigate impacts in vulnerable communities. And we do have some new opportunities over this next couple of years because of funding that will become available, including the AB 32 funding that will become available. So, be my quick summary.